In this video, I'll be spending another 100 days in Pixelmon. Here are my goals. First, complete the Dynamax quest and Gigantamax a Pokemon. Second, train my Pokemon to defeat a 5-star raid den. And third, test my strength and defeat a legendary raid den. Okay, so I loaded in and had to choose a Pokemon. I normally pick water or fire types, but instead, I went for this green monkey. I soon entered the world and was in some sort of snowy forest. I then said hi to my little buddy, who was hands down the cutest Pokemon I've ever seen. After that, we went exploring and found this huge shadowy figure close by. It floated above these rocks, and I was curious to see what would happen if I clicked on it. When I did, it brought me to this battle screen, and when I pressed this button, it started a countdown. I had no idea what was happening, but as the countdown ended, the shadowy figure grew to this massive size and turned out to be a Ferrothorn. Aside from him, there were 3 other Pokemon in the battle that were all level 3. The 4 of us were too weak to do any damage, and he actually ended up exploding. He disappeared, so I guess that meant we lost, but seeing a Ferrothorn was pretty awesome though. Now that was crazy, but it was even crazier to find an ultimate boss this early into the game. There was no way I could even fight that, so I decided to just gather supplies instead. I got some wood and made a crafting table to make my tools. After chopping down some trees, I decided to explore this biome. I eventually found a berry and decided to use it as a food source for now. I also found some apricorns that were scattered around this forest. I continued collecting them and soon found this strange dungeon area that led to somewhere. I crossed my fingers and hoped I wouldn't regret this. I thought it was a trap, but it turned out to be some room that had a chest with the most useless items in this mod. I soon got out of there and continued on with my journey. It was getting kind of late and I wanted to find a place to settle down. As I searched around, I found more of those rock structures. To me, I think it's really cool how you can only see their shadow. It kinda makes it into a little guessing game for who that Pokemon could be. Now, I am very limited in my Pokemon knowledge, but I'm sure many of you will be able to recognize them. Anyway, it soon became nightfall and I eventually found this cozy little campsite. I found a person here and was excited to talk to him, but he actually ended up being a total jerk. Because of his rudeness, I decided to steal all of his food supplies. I also opened his door and found him and his little buddy talking smack behind my back. Because of that, I decided to take a nap in his bed, and that actually ended up healing my Grookey. I stayed here for a bit to use their furnaces, but then a Glastrier spawned in the ice plains and I started panicking. Before I headed out, this guy had the audacity to send me on a quest which I obviously refused since I had a legendary to find. I soon found the Glastrier, but I didn't really know what to do next. It was such a shame to leave it here, but I had nothing to catch it with. However, even if I did have the balls, my Grookey would just die to him. On the bright side, I did end up finding a Poke Center and thought this place would be perfect for a temporary base. Now that I have healers, I can now start training Grookey. As soon as I went outside, I found this gigantic crab-like Pokemon. When I initiated the battle, my first thought was, what in the world am I looking at right now? And my second thought was, wow, that has to be the ugliest Pokemon I've ever seen. He was incredibly strong, but we managed to get 5% of his HP down before he exploded. After that, I found another boss and I noticed it only had 1 star. I guess that meant he was easier to fight, but this guy was still tough as nails. We only took about 20% of his HP before he disappeared. Now, if I want to stand a chance in those boss battles, I need to start leveling up my Grookey. I fought this electric sheep, and the fight lasted a lot longer than I thought it would. I did defeat it though, got some food, and even got an achievement. When I headed back to base, I discovered this huge cave right outside my house and decided to do a bit of mining. I mined a bunch of iron, a bunch of coal, bauxite, sapphire, crystal, and even some diamonds. After mining them, I made my way out of the cave. On my way back to base, I found one of those boss Pokemon again, and I believe this one was a Ninetales. I soon learned that this was actually called a max raid battle, and when you activate it, the Pokemon go into their Dynamax form on top of these rocks called raid dens. The other trainers and I have 10 turns to defeat it, or else it'll blow up and disappear. Anyway, it was nice setting up base at this Poke Center, but I actually wanted to find a village. I packed up all my stuff and headed out to go find one. However, I was having so much trouble finding one to the point where I decided to climb this huge mountain in hopes to find something. I made it up to the top, but didn't find much except for a few raid dens. I kept looking and looking, but couldn't find anything, and I was beginning to starve as well. However, as the sun rose up, I had finally found what I was looking for. When I entered the village, I wanted to set up my base ASAP, but I also wanted to just explore the whole area. I discovered a gym here, and it looked pretty beat up with all the vines around it. I then ran around town to find the perfect house for me, and I ended up choosing this one. I came inside and already loved how cozy it felt. I then decided that this will be my new permanent home. After settling down, I found out that this town had 2 Pokécenters. Never seen that before, but I guess I shouldn't complain. I also visited the Pokémart to sell a bunch of items I didn't need, like berries and potions. With my money, I decided to buy some Ultra Balls, which costed about 1200 each. When I went back home to place my bed, an Articuno spawned in a cold desert biome. I sprinted out of my house to go find the biome, and I had a feeling this was it. I had absolutely no clue that a legendary could spawn in a den, but I'm kinda glad that's a thing. I also noticed that this was a 5-star raid battle, and I believe that's the hardest raid battle in the mod. Now that's great and all, but I was even more shocked to see this Articuno in its Galarian form, which is not something you see every day. He obviously wrecked us, but I was just happy to find him. The next morning when I woke up, I decided that I wanted to start a farm in the village. There was a river by my home, and I thought this was the perfect place. For now, I only placed down black and yellow apricorns, and while I waited for those to grow, I continued training my Grookey. Getting levels early on takes a lot of time, but it's honestly the best part of any Pokemon game. After defeating the Sentret and getting some leather, I made some leather boots, which I then used to craft some old running boots. Now I can move at tremendous speed and get to places a lot quicker. I then crafted an anvil and decided to use my diamonds for a diamond hammer. I also saved my last diamond in case I needed to craft a healer. After making some discs, I placed them on the anvil and started hammering down. I thought this would take forever, but it was extremely fast with the diamond hammer. After cooking some apricorns, I crafted another disc and of course hammered it down. I then made a button out of stone and finally crafted my first Ultra Ball. After that, I continued training and encountered a Grimer. I was pretty shocked to find one in this biome, but then I realized that he actually spawned in a different biome, one that I've never seen before. As I walked around, I fell into this poisonous pond and my heart started ticking away as I tried to climb out of it to save myself. Thankfully, I survived, but after that experience, I made sure to get out of here. As I traveled back home, I found a Milotic in this river. My Grookey was higher level now, and since it was grass versus water, I thought I had a chance. But it turned out the Milotic was a lot stronger than I thought he was. On the bright side though, after defeating this Geodude, my Grookey finally started to evolve. It took a lot of time and a lot of training, but I was glad to now have a Thwackey.
Thwackey!
The next morning, I woke up to find the villagers offering some quests that I usually ignore. However, there was one villager with a purple exclamation point who I was super excited to find. Her name was Professor Lyra, and when I talked to her, she gave me this fallen star, which is part of a very special quest. In the Shooting Star quest, I have to empower the fallen star by defeating and capturing Pokemon. However, the numbers in this quest seem to be bugged, so I'll have to switch to an older version of the mod to do it. In the meantime, I checked the progress of my apricorn farm and was pretty impressed with how much I could harvest already. Aside from black and yellow apricorns, I also planted some red, some pink, some green, a lot of white, and even some blue apricorns. With all these apricorns, I started to hammer them into lids. I made even more iron bases with the rest of my ingots to craft even more Ultra Balls. I also made some timer balls, some dusk balls to catch Pokemon at night, some heavy balls for the really fat Pokemon, and a ton of other balls as well. Now I hate to admit it, but building an apricorn farm around a river was not the best idea. Harvesting crops took a long time, and it was a lot less efficient than the boring way of putting them in rows. Now the biggest nightmare of it all was having to hammer down all these bases and lids. But thanks to my diamond hammer, I was able to save a lot of time. It took me a while to craft all of these balls, but I'm sure they'll be useful for the quest. Now in this quest, I had to defeat a total of 75 Pokemon and catch 25 of them. By doing this quest, I'll actually be killing 2 birds with 1 stone, since I'll get to train my Thwackey as well. Wild Pokemon do get stronger as I level up, but as soon as I reach the 30s and learn a few new moves, life will be a lot easier. Although, I'm going to need a lot more levels if I want to fight legendary bosses like this Raticate. Right after that Raticate, I actually found a boss Manectric close by, which was quite shocking, no pun intended. Now the next morning, I traveled to the desert and found a Pokemon I've never seen before. It was a level 39 Heatmore, who I ended up catching after only getting it to half HP. I did not expect that encounter at all, but I was glad to have finally caught my first Pokemon. I'm not sure what he is, maybe an anteater or something, but regardless, he's special to me and I'll never replace him. After that, I spent some time in the desert taking down a ton of Pokemon with Razorleaf. I then climbed this mountain to see what other Pokemon I could find here. I expected to see a few Aerons, but what I found was 10 times better. I could not believe that I found a gigantic Flareon on top of this mountain. I've never caught a wild Flareon before in the Pokemon games, so I guess it's just a Pixelmon thing. Now I used to be a huge fan of Flareon, but my new favorite Eevee has to be Sylveon because of his amazing ability. I'm sure that all Eevees have their own fan base, so let me know in the comments which Eevee's your favorite. Speaking of favorites, I ran into my favorite Steel Pokemon. I really wanted to catch it, but I also didn't want to waste all my balls since Beldum has an extremely low catch rate. As soon as it became nighttime, I threw a Dusk Ball hoping it would catch it, but I also didn't mind if it didn't. When it became daytime, I continued fighting more Pokemon and even found some that were uncommon. I ended up finding a Larvesta, which I didn't expect to find so easily since it's a pretty rare Pokemon. Now the Pokemon in the desert were getting a lot stronger, and I didn't have any water Pokemon to deal with all these ground types. I do hope to find a water Pokemon soon, since it's generally nice to have one on a team. After battling some fish, I noticed on the right that I only had to defeat 23 more Pokemon. It may sound like a lot, but it's actually not that much if I think about it. My team is pretty strong now, and they're able to one-shot a lot of Pokemon. After the desert, I traveled to the savannah and found this huge purple snake. This Cobra stood no chance against my Thwackey and was pretty easy to catch. Now as I travel to all these different biomes, I'm traveling further and further away from my home, so I don't have access to my healer. However, I'm not too worried about that since I keep finding these Pokécenters. These buildings are quite common and I can pretty much find them anywhere. Moving on, I continued battling more Pokemon. I struggled a bit to find Pokemon here, but then I found this cool looking butterfly. This made me curious to see what other things I can find in this biome. As I explored around, I discovered what looked to be some ancient ruins. I took a minute to search the area, but couldn't really find anything other than these item frames. As I tried to figure out what that place was, a Keldeo spawned in the river biome, and I was so glad that it spawned right next to me. Now this Keldeo was level 50, which is pretty high, but not that high compared to my Pokemon. I also had enough balls to catch him, so I did everything in my power to not let this opportunity go to waste. It took a few Ultra Balls, but after throwing one last ball, I had captured the Keldeo, and even got an achievement for it. I swung my axe like a maniac because of how happy I was. I didn't expect it to happen, but I somehow caught my first mythical Pokemon. After that, I noticed that I just needed to defeat 2 more Pokemon for the quest. I soon found a Sandaconda, which was a perfect match for my Keldeo. This was also a good time to test out his strength and see how powerful he is. I'll definitely keep Keldeo on the team, and I'll also keep my starter, but I'm not sure what fate lies for the rest of them. It's a pretty heartbreaking experience having to shove a Pokemon inside a computer for the rest of their life, but I'm sure I'll get over it. Anyway, after completing the first part of the quest, I can now focus on catching Pokemon. Since it was nighttime, I thought I'd use a Dusk Ball to capture this Buffalant. I spent a lot of time crafting those Pokeballs, so I'm really glad that I can now put them to use. Now as I climbed up this mountain, I noticed the structure up at the top. I believe this was a Zapdos shrine, and I was pretty glad to know it was here if I ever needed to use it. While I was catching Pokemon, I heard the strangest sound. I tried to find out what that was, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I eventually found the culprit, and it happened to be some type of lizard hiding in the grass. He may look cute, but he was a very strong opponent for Thwackey, and was even level 40. I ended up catching him though, and decided to put him on the team. The next morning, I decided to head back home after such a long journey. I'm sure the villagers miss me and are probably wondering where I've been all this time. I'll also be catching a lot of Pokemon on the way back, and once I'm done with the quest, I'll need to talk to Professor Lyra. Now, the worst mistake I could have possibly made was forgetting to write down the coords to the village. I thought I'd find my way back if I went through this forest, but I was completely lost. The only thing I found was the part of the forest that was completely burned down. On the bright side, I did end up finding some exotic Pokemon. I caught this Cramorant with a netball and even got an achievement for just using a different type of ball. Now as I continued catching these Pokemon, I noticed that my Thwackey just needed one more level to evolve. I had a lot of good times with this little guy, but it's now time for an upgrade. As soon as I caught this ferret, my Thwackey finally started to evolve. He evolved into Rillaboom and even learned a new move. I honestly love that this guy had his own drum, and the design of it was pretty impressive. Now I took a look at my current team, and even though it wasn't the best, I did catch some rare Pokemon, which I was very proud of. If I had to replace some of these Pokemon, I would definitely replace my giant spider and my tiny cat. I already have a Keldeo, who is a much better water type, and a Flareon, who is a slightly better fire type. Moving on, I wanted to test out Rillaboom's new drum beating move. It's his signature move, and it proved to be quite effective against these higher leveled Pokemon. My buddy since day one has become quite powerful now, and I can't wait to see what other moves he can learn. Now back to the topic of finding the village, I still have absolutely no idea where I'm going. While I searched around, I found this gigantic stone building out here in the middle of nowhere. I entered the building and immediately found myself at a dead end. This place seemed very sketchy and mysterious, so I decided it would be better if I just headed out. After that, I ended up in some sort of swampland. At this point, I was pretty tired of searching for my home, so I thought it would be best to just focus on the quest first. While I was here, I encountered all sorts of different creatures. I found this lovely parrot that was impossible to catch, a chameleon that can shoot pink beams, a Pokemon who looked like he'd evolve into Butterfree but doesn't, the bug I was most scared of as a kid, and an ape who is not really an ape but rather a monkey. After catching them, I just needed one more Pokemon to catch, and that's when I found this Clefairy. I caught the Clefairy with a Dusk Ball, and once I did, a message appeared saying, "The fallen star feels warm to the touch." It took me a while, but I finally made it back home, and I can now talk to Professor Lyra. I had a little trouble finding her, but the pink arrow at the bottom helped me locate her house. Once I talked to her, she gave me a new quest to go fight some trainers. For this quest, I decided to take on the Steel Gym. I've got a powerful team now, but I'm sure my Rillaboom can handle it by himself. After all, he is an enormous ape with a carved out drum. Now when I got to the gym leader, I was expecting this to be a walk in the park. But then I started freaking out when his poniard grew 5 times the size of my gorilla and now had these huge sharp needles. However, there was nothing to fear as I took him down with the rest of his team, and was rewarded with the Mind Badge along with the TR. Now that I have this badge, I need something to put it in like a badge case. I can create one using apricorns, and I can make different colored ones as well. It felt like forever, but I finally returned to my apricorn farm and harvested all the apricorns. Now once I cook up these apricorns and stock up on Pokeballs, I'm going to head out and find some villages. Finding 20 trainers is a lot harder than it seems, so I hope to find some gyms at these villages. When I made it back home, I cooked up my apricorns, and as a man, I obviously made a pink badge case. I then placed my steel badge in there and couldn't wait to collect more. After making some Ultra Balls and Dusk Balls, I left home once again to go search for a village. Now finding a village was definitely not the easiest. I even traveled to multiple biomes and still had trouble finding one. However, I was able to find some pretty cool things on the way. I found this Blastoise in the water and I thought I could take it on now that I had a Rillaboom. But then I remembered that I was dealing with a very strong turtle that had a huge cannon on his back. Aside from fighting bosses, I was able to finally find a village. This one had a fire gym, as well as this huge opening in the ground. It looked like some kind of arena, and I could definitely picture Pokemon fighting in there. Now after being welcomed to the Beacon Gym, I entered and took on the first trainer. I also wanted to see if I could take on the whole gym without needing to heal. I planned to save Keldeo for the gym leader, and the rest of my Pokemon for the trainers. When I got to the gym leader, all of my Pokemon fainted except for Keldeo, so I guess everything went as planned. After a few bubble beams, I defeated the gym leader and was rewarded with a volcano badge. I felt pretty confident after beating the gym, so I thought I'd try to take on this Houndoom. However, that confidence was quickly destroyed after he obliterated my team. Moving on, I was able to find my third village in a savanna. I was also really surprised to have found an ice gym here. I did not expect this gym to be in such a hot biome. Now I was excited to take on the gym, but I realized my Pokemon are not the best against ice types. I thought I could just rely on Keldeo, but it looks like he won't be that effective here. I did have a fire type, which was good against ice, but the only fire type move he had was Ember, and it's not so great. Now when I got to the gym leader, he sent out this cool looking snowflake Pokemon that my Keldeo had no trouble taking down. I was completely wrong about Keldeo not being useful, and he actually took down 5 Pokemon by himself. Rillaboom finished off the last one, and I was rewarded with the Icicle badge. After the ice gym, I continued searching for more gyms, preferably a ground gym. I tried looking for a gym in this village, but I guess it didn't have one. The only thing I found was this huge building which I think is a church. I may have not found a gym, but I did end up finding a Fennekin by this lava pool. I always get super excited whenever I see a starter Pokemon in the wild, since they're extremely rare to find. Now since the Fennekin was only level 16, I waited till nightfall to use a Duskfall to capture him. I thought about keeping him on the team, but then I found a Delphox right by the pond, which was the craziest coincidence. Thankfully, he was level 50, so there was no risk in killing him. I was happy to capture him, but I was still shocked that he just appeared at such a weird timing. Afterwards, I traveled to the desert and found a desert temple. I love finding these temples since the chests have a lot of useful items that I can give to my Pokemon. Soon after that, I came across this huge tower right by the shore. I came inside and climbed up the stairs to see what kind of goodies I could find at the top. The only thing I found though was a scroll with writing on it and a couple of chests with some water gems. The tower was pretty cool to explore, but I hope I can make some use out of it in the future. After a ton of searching, I found another village and a level 60 Lairon. It didn't look like there was a gym in the village, but I was still glad to catch this cool looking dinosaur. I also ended up catching this bulldog with my big and beefy Lairon. Soon after that, I finally found another gym, and this one seemed to be a water gym. Just when I was about to take it on, I got distracted by this huge bird in the air and I wanted to go capture it. After catching it, I went to the swimmer's stronghold and was pretty excited to take on this gym. I felt pretty confident that I could just take on the gym with my Rillaboom, but it turned out this gym was insanely hard. When I made it up to the gym leader, my whole team got destroyed by one Pokemon. With the exception of Rillaboom, my team wasn't the best against water types, so after this fight, I made sure to make some adjustments. While I was in battle, I noticed there was an epic boss here, and there was even an ultimate one as well. I had no chance against the Scizor, so I just took on the Blaziken. Now this guy was incredibly strong, but the great thing about him is that I don't have to do that much damage to beat him. Whenever he uses the move Brave Bird, he loses a little bit of his HP, which is very nice. I was down to my last Pokemon, and I ended up defeating him after just one last Brave Bird. I was glad that I beat my first epic boss, and I got some pretty nice items as well. I also got a Keystone, which will allow me to Mega Evolve my Pokemon. Right after the battle, there was another epic boss that spawned close by. I decided to take him on the next morning, and I noticed that there was a level 69 trainer here. Now I expected this guy to be the toughest trainer I ever fought, but it turns out his Pokemon were extremely weak. I then took on the Kangaskhan and realized how useful my Granbull was here. The Kangaskhan barely did any damage to him, and I was able to slowly take away his health with Outrage. I guess I made a good decision when I caught this Bulldog out in the fields. He eventually died in battle, but once I revived him, he was able to take down the epic boss. Upon defeat, I was rewarded with a Z Crystal and Kangaskhan's Mega Stone. After that fight, I found a level 50 Jolteon next to the water gym and I really wanted to catch it. I love having electric types on the team and I feel like he's my solution to beating the water gym. I took on the gym leader again and this time brought 3 electric types on the team, but then I soon realized that my Jolteon did not know any electric type moves. I lost once again, and I really just needed to come up with a better strategy. I tried looking for other electric types in the savannah, but couldn't find anything better, so I guess I'll have to stick with what I have. My Manectric is able to dish out a lot of damage, so I do have that going for me. Since all of my Pokemon are kind of useless here, I'll have to keep reviving him if I want to win. I also relied on my Jolteon to do a little bit of damage before he fainted. After taking down this Cloyster, all that was left was a Caracosta, and after one more Thunder, I finally beat the leader. And with that, I was able to get my 4th badge. I made my way down from the gym and was surprised to find a Quilava right here in this village. I obviously captured him, since it's always nice to have starters in your collection. I then admired my badge collection and realized I only had 5 trainers left to defeat. For the last 5, I decided it would be best to fight the trainers here in this village. This guy only had fire-type Pokemon, which was a bit of a problem for Rillaboom. But he ended up defeating all of them by himself, and once he did, a message popped up saying the fallen star pulsates with energy. After that message, I hopped on my Staraptor and headed home. As time passed by, I finally made it back to the village to talk to Professor Lyra. Once I found her, she held my fallen star and gave me a Dynamax band. The band will allow me to Gigantamax my Pokemon, but I'll have to find a mushroom biome first. I also switched back to Pixelmon 8.3, so as I try to find this mushroom biome, I'll be fighting a ton of dens along the way. In the battle, there was a Dynamax button in the middle that changed my abilities once I pressed it. Whenever I use these abilities, my Pokemon grows 10 times in size and gets a ton of HP as well. The nice thing about Max Overgrowth is that it creates a grassy terrain, which makes my grass moves even stronger. However, even with the Dynamax band, my Pokemon are still very weak, so I'll need to find some easier fights. I ended up finding a Turtwig in the forest, and I knew I was more than capable of beating it. Once I took away all his HP, I had finally beaten my first raid den, and even received some items upon defeating it. I was even allowed to catch the Turtwig with an Ultra Ball, but unfortunately, it ended up failing. I was a bit disappointed, but I wasn't that surprised since you only have one chance. Regardless, I'm still very excited to be able to fight all these dens. I could not believe that I actually found a Ditto out here in the snow biome, since he's one of the hardest Pokemon to find. Aside from Ditto, there are a ton of other cool Pokemon here as well. I fought this giant badger, who looked like he'd be easy to take down. As I got him down to half HP, he brought out the shield that protected him from our attacks. 4 of our Pokemon fainted, and we ended up losing the battle. Aside from big scary badgers, I was able to find the legendary Ice Dragon out here in this biome. I obviously can't defeat it, but at least I'll get to see how much damage I can do. All legendaries have 5-star dens, so I'll need to know how many levels it'll take to beat one. Other than raid dens, there's still plenty of bosses to fight. I found this huge Absol in the mountains, and I realized he was much easier to fight than the dens. It did take 2 Pokemon to do it, but I ended up defeating my first ultimate boss. After the Absol, I prioritized on looking for an ocean. I looked through multiple biomes for one, and found some interesting things on the way. Also, I believe the game may have mistaken a palm tree for a Pokemon. Aside from that, I also found this water dragon, which meant an ocean was nearby. As I look for a mushroom biome, I'll also be fighting a lot of ocean dens. Some of these ocean dens include starters like this Dewott, who I had no problem taking down. When I defeated him, I used a netball to catch him, and I also noticed that I received some EXP candies, which is pretty sweet. Other than the Dewott, I also found a Totodile, a Wartortle, and even a Brionne. As I flew across the ocean, a message even appeared saying a Latios had spawned, and I was really excited since I now had a good chance of catching him. Thankfully, he's a legendary that flies over the ocean, so he wasn't that hard to find. Once I got his HP to the red, all I had to do was throw one netball to capture him, and with that, I had caught my first legendary and even got some achievements. I flew over the ocean on his back, and was excited to see what other Pokemon I could find here. I was able to find some Pokemon that I've never seen before, and this one kinda reminded me of a sea dragon. Other than Pokemon, I also found a bunch of these Poke Centers that were conveniently scattered around the ocean. After that, I continued exploring the waters and found this really cool Pokemon that looked like some kind of lizard but stood like a human. He was insanely strong, and I didn't have much hope in beating him, but as I fought him, a Latios spawned. I may have lost the battle, but it didn't really matter to me since I had a more important objective. I soon found the Latios and initiated the battle between brother and sister. The battle took absolutely forever, but I eventually got him to the red. However, it was a good thing that it took a long time since it made my timer balls more effective and allowed me to catch the Latios with just one ball. Now, I was glad to have both legendaries of the Eon duo, but I just couldn't decide which one I wanted to stay on my team. Since red is my favorite color, I decided to go with Latios, and I feel like that was a wise decision. Now, I've been having a lot of fun battling and catching all these water Pokemon, but I almost forgot my main mission. I still need to find a mushroom biome, so after catching this Dreadnought, I'm going to have to avoid these distractions and put all my attention into finding one. To be fair though, they are extremely rare. After a couple dreadful days of searching, I finally found the mushroom biome and I couldn't wait to get some max mushrooms. However, just like the biome, these shrooms are really hard to find and there's only a handful of them on the island. It took a little bit of time, but I did end up finding one. I then searched around the entire island to find a total of 6 shrooms. I wanted to find 9, but 6 is enough to make 2 max soups, which is more than plenty. I then headed out of the biome to return back to the mainland. I arrived at this forest with the tallest trees and found this huge bird with a sword and a shield in his hand. This was a 5-star raid battle, and once I saw a Magikarp on the team, I decided it'd be best to just forfeit. Shortly after, a Zekrom had appeared in a redwood forest biome, the biome with the super tall trees. I was scared that I wouldn't find him because of all the trees in the way, but here he is. I then pulled out Rillaboom and fed him a max soup, giving him the Gigantamax factor. I waited so long to be able to do this, and I can't wait to see what he looks like. Once I pressed the button, he got a new move called Drum Solo. I used the move, and Rillaboom's drum grew enormously into this monstrous drum set, all while his body stayed the same size. He grew as tall as the trees, and his form was big enough to completely block out the Zekrom. With this, I was able to complete my first goal, which was to Gigantamax a Pokemon. He may have died in battle, but I was just glad to see that new form. Speaking of new forms, I found the Centiskorch that happened to be pink instead of his original color. However, he did look the same, and the only difference was his color, so I'm not really sure what to make out of it. It's probably just a new feature, and if that's the case, I can't wait to see what other forms they added in. For now though, I still need to focus on making my Rillaboom strong enough to defeat a 5-star raid battle. I decided to train a little bit in the Mesa, and even though it's not the best place to train a grass type, it's still a great place to catch Pokemon. After catching a Tepig, a Moltres spawned in a den on top of a Mesa plateau. I was a bit shocked at first, but then I realized that this was home to a lot of fire types. However, this was not the flaming bird I had expected to be on top of this plateau. It just so happened to be a Galarian Moltres, which is even better. Sadly, Rillaboom was the only one on the team that actually did damage, so we ended up losing. After the battle though, I found a legendary boss close by, and it just so happened to be a boss that had a special item I wanted. It had a Megastone that I could use to evolve my Aggron. I Dynamaxed my Keldeo, and did my best against him, but he was just way too strong. All of my Pokemon fainted, so I thought I'd give it another shot with a different team. I knew this team wouldn't stand a chance against the Aggron, but I really just wanted that Megastone. It sucked a lot when he beat me, but I wouldn't expect less from a Steel type. I might not be ready to take on that boss, but I know for sure I'm ready for this one. This guy might have a volcano on his back, but he also has poor stats and is extremely weak to water. I took him out with a few bubbles and got a Park Ball from him, which I didn't even know was a boss drop. After that, I ended up finding another one of those towers, except this one was a little different. This was actually the Tower of Darkness, a very special tower for a very special Pokemon. After finding the tower, I now know the Pokemon I want to catch with my Park Ball. There was a special biome I needed to visit, and I remember finding it earlier near the swamp. After a little bit of searching, I was able to locate the Bamboo Forest, the forest where Kubfu lives. He only spawns during the afternoon, so I was ready to spend a few days here. I explored around in the meantime to see what else I could find in this biome. I actually couldn't find much in this forest, except for a few stray Pokemon and an old little cottage. I was tempted to go AFK, but I also get excited whenever I see the message pop up. While I waited, I got to see some 1v1s, which was kinda nice. After some time, the message finally appeared and I immediately went to go look for it. I was able to find the Kung Fu Fighting Bear, and he turned out to be a lot smaller than I expected. I then threw my Park Ball at him, and for those who don't know, a Park Ball is basically a Master Ball since it has a 100% chance of catching any wild Pokemon. After catching it, I went straight back to the Tower of Darkness. Once I made it all the way to the top, I pulled out my Kubfu and he started to evolve. It wasn't long until this cub grew into this full-size bear with the most intimidating fighting stance. Urshifu is also the most perfect legendary I could ask for right now. I still had one max soup left, so I decided to give it to him. I then got into a battle with a den Pokemon and realized he had one of the sickest Gigantamax forms I had ever seen. Despite how awesome he looked, he was still level 15 and barely did any damage. However, getting levels is not that big of an issue thanks to these raid dens. They might be an absolute pain to fight, but they do drop a lot of EXP candies, rare candies, and even Dynamax candy. I still have 2 more goals to accomplish, so I'll be giving all my candies to Rillaboom. Now if I want to stand a chance against a 5-star raid battle, I'll need a few more levels. If I want to speed up the process, I'll need to head back to the ocean and fight as many water Pokemon as I can. My Rillaboom has absolutely no problem fighting off these 4-star dens. However, he does have a problem with fighting 5-star dens since they have a ton of levels and tend to have just really strong Pokemon. As time passed by, I eventually found this huge jellyfish above the ocean. He just so happened to be a 5-star and a rock type as well, so I thought I had a good chance at this. I initiated the battle and had already taken a third of his HP away. It looked like the battle was going well, and my team surprisingly wasn't dying, but we just didn't do enough damage. This was only his first shield, and we just didn't have enough turns to take away the second and the rest of his HP. I was a little sad after losing that battle, but I was soon cheered up after finding a Dracovish. He might be one of the strongest Pokemon out there, but that's only if he has the right moveset. I beat him pretty easily and got a ton of candy, berries, and even the TR, Dragon Dance. Shortly after, I sailed the ocean for quite a bit of time and found a 5-star den which happened to be a Kingler. I definitely hit the jackpot on this one because not only is he a water Pokemon, but he's also an extremely weak water Pokemon. I took out his first shield pretty easily, and he took out 2 members of the team, but I wasn't that worried. After using a Sludge Bomb and a Wood Hammer, we beat the Kingler, and I had finally completed my second goal of defeating a 5-star raid den. Now, all that's left is for me to beat a legendary raid den. Legendaries typically have strong moves and good base stats, so this is going to be a lot harder than any other 5-star. I'm also not sure if I want to stay in the ocean to find one, or find one on land. The ocean is nice, but there are more legendaries on land, and I feel like I'll have a better chance of finding one. I can also find some pretty cool Pokemon as well. I was a little scared when taking on the big bad wolf, but I also remembered that my Rillaboom is level 100 now. This guy was a 5-star, and is known to be a really strong Pokemon, so after beating him, I felt like I had a pretty good chance at taking on a legendary. Although, I might have to eat up those words after finding a Solgaleo in a Chaparral biome. I knew I wouldn't stand a chance against him, but I thought I'd just try anyway. Hopefully, I won't lose as hard as I think I will. When the battle began, I took a look at the lineup and already lost all hope in trying to beat him. I had a Pokemon who only knew how to heal, a fish that couldn't do any damage, and a cute yet ugly looking donkey. It took us a total of 4 turns just to take away a third of his HP and bring out his shield. After losing this battle, I learned to never underestimate these dens, and I would plan to head back to the ocean. I set sail during a thunderstorm, and I was expecting to see a certain legendary pop up. I spent a lot of time in the ocean without even a single message pop up, but I was able to find something else instead. I found a Feraligatr, and it wasn't that shocking since I've been finding a ton of starter Pokemon throughout this entire journey. I took a look at all my water starters and realized that I caught almost every generation, with the exception of 3. Perhaps I should just make this my new team and forget about my Rillaboom. However, getting rid of a gorilla with a drum is not the easiest thing to do. Now on to more important things, I still need to find a legendary in the ocean. I paddled, and after paddling for a while, a Lugia appeared in a den in a deep ocean biome. I panicked a little, but over time, I've gotten pretty good at finding them. I was excited to battle him, but then I found out he was a psychic and flying type when all these years I thought he was a water type. It is what it is, and I guess I'll just try my best. We went through his shield pretty quickly, which gave me a lot of hope for the battle. However, he actually ended up getting all that HP back. We only had 10 turns before the battle was over, and him using Recover over and over was the worst thing that could have possibly happened. On the 11th turn, he ran out of Recover PP, but we still lost the battle. Now for the past few days, I have been traveling miles across the ocean in hopes to find a special whale. I did find a whale, and he sure was special, but he wasn't the one I was looking for. When morning came and the rain stopped, I accepted the fact that I wasn't going to find him. However, just when I got on land, a message popped up. Apparently a Volcanion spawned in this biome, and I found him close by to this village. He was a fire and water type, and I believe he was the only Pokemon with those 2 types. This battle was definitely going to be interesting for my Rillaboom. Now once the battle started, I was able to take a third of his HP away. The battle was going well, but things became harder as the fight progressed. I was able to take his first shield away, but I was also the only one doing damage, and it was already turn 6. When it became turn 10, we got his HP low, and there was actually a bit of hope left. We got him all the way down to a sliver of HP left, but sadly, he disappeared. The loss was harder than you could ever imagine, but at least I learned something that day. I learned that teams in raid battles are absolutely useless and that they're only there to make your life harder. I also accepted the fact that I can only beat water legendaries. After running around like a maniac, I thanked the Lord when a Suicune spawned in a den by this river. The other raid battles didn't go so well, but I had absolute confidence in this one. The lineup was not so hot, but we can work with it. Now I wasn't worried about my damage or dying, but I was worried about my team dying. However, we did have a Clefairy who healed us when we got a bit low. We were slowly running out of turns, but that didn't matter to me since I already knew this battle was won. I was able to beat the Suicune, and I had successfully completed my third goal of defeating a legendary den. I absolutely loved Pixelmon 8.3, and I can't wait for future updates. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I appreciate all the support you leave on this video, and I will see you next time.